Hello, everyone. I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds to make sure all the attendees are getting in, and then we'll go on and get started today. Okay. Welcome to NASIG's Continuing Education webinar series. Before we begin with today's webinar, I just want to share some information about access to past and future webinars. If you are interested in learning more about previous webinars, you can find archived webinars at the link on the slide that you see right here, as well as the CEC webinar YouTube channel, and that link is also noted on the slide. Our next webinar, Reframing Authority Control to Balance Creators' Autonomy and Users' Needs, that will be held on June 9th. Please register at the link noted if you are interested. And really quick, a little bit of housekeeping. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to ask attendees to please use the chat for questions. We'll have time at the end of the 3 presentations for a brief Q&A. Next slide. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's presentation, Digital Preservation 101, 404, no more. Next slide. Michelle Polchow is the head of Electronic Resources Management Unit at the University of California, Davis. She leads the lifecycle management of licensed electronic resources, including troubleshooting, access, authentication, and long-term preservation. Alicia Wise is Executive Director of the CLOCKSS Digital Archive, where research libraries and academic publishers come together to ensure the long-term preservation of the scholarly record. And Ella Hitchcock is the Scholarly Publishing Manager at the Stanford Graduate School of Business Library, where she manages the school's institutional repository, including oversight of digital preservation work and developing policy for long-term storage and preservation of both digital and physical items. For additional information about our speakers, please visit the speaker bios on the NASIG website. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Michelle.
Thanks, Maria. I'm going to kick us off today by asking for audience participation. And if you would be willing to put into chat what drives your interest in digital preservation. And if there's something that sparks your interest as we go, then feel free to put it in at any time. We're just collecting data as we can get it. I'm going to start off by going over the charge of the Preservation Committee, and we aim to educate and inform our members and the community at large in ways that we can work to ensure digital scholarly content in all formats remains available to future users. We are very active in collaborating with librarians and publishers and work to develop best practices and include the unique challenges that open access presents. We also collaborate with other organizations that are able to broaden our range of efforts and extend awareness and marketing of those collaborators. So today, our agenda is to share with you some of the guides and publications that our committee has developed and recently updated in the last year. And we're going to start off with just Digital Preservation 101, the Guide to Keepers Registry, talking points and questions to ask publishers about digital preservation, and we'll end with our publication, the Model Digital Preservation Policy. So to get started, I will cover the basics, and I think our goal is to give you an overview of what digital preservation is in shared terminology. We've looked at this from the perspective that the library's historic mission is to safeguard and ensure access to future users of our content. The purpose of scholarship is to educate and reproduce scholarship and build upon that. And then The problem that we see is that when content becomes unavailable, it breaks the citation chain, so others cannot verify cited works, and it risks a breakdown of the scholarly system. So why is digital preservation crucial? Well, as we all know, it's the format of preference currently and getting more popular given artificial intelligence, dynamic databases, interactive resources, knowledge graphs, and still emerging new digitally created works. And one of the problems is in creating these works is that decisions are made early in the life cycle of research. And so the skills and technology, the metadata, thinking about dissemination, access, and usability is not always a foundational part of the scholarship when it begins, but it does determine its longevity in the end. So what is digital preservation, and who's in this business of ensuring that the scholarly record will be available for future users? There are certifications. The Trusted Digital Repository references standards and best practices that have been agreed upon in the industry. They are agencies that are dedicated to planning and implementing the maintenance of materials over the long term. So their goal is fixed on how the future will carry administratively, technically, the ownership, and how it's being preserved. Checking to make sure corruption and unaltered files, especially if they are formatted and migrated. And then their infrastructure is looking at redundancy and longevity as they pertain to maintenance. So examples are CLOCKSS, Portico, HathiTrust, and Scholars Portal, which is in Canada. Sometimes learning what digital preservation is learning the opposite. So backup and snapshot services are not considered long-term preservation archiving agencies. They are missing components of the full infrastructure. So digitization, backup services like Microsoft and Amazon and the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine would not be considered long-term preservation efforts. So with that, I'm going to go to one of our organizations that we have collaborated with, and it is the Keepers Registry. It's the only service monitoring preservation arrangements. It tracks digital and digitized serials, including scholarly journals and open access. It's part of the International Standard Serials Numbers ISSN Center. It's a global organization with 93 country members, and it maintains the overall ISSN portal, but it has also added the directory of open access scholarly resources roads, which identifies open access titles, and it supports the Keepers Registry. It has a free service that you can search on the browser on a title by title basis, but it also has a brand new tool that's been released to analyze journals in a fee for service called Submit, Retrieve, and Reuse. So I'm going to do a quick sample of the free browser tool. And as I go, you might note the wealth of metadata that's available to librarians on just a title example. So first of all, I entered the Journal of Forestry, and within the search results, the New Zealand Journal of Forestry Science popped up, and I picked this example because it had both the road and keepers symbols on it, denoting that this was a characteristic of this particular journal. I also noted that very recently the ISSN Center has updated the portal so that you can now search, do an advanced search by roads or by keepers. So those could be useful tools as well. The other thing I'm going to note is among the metadata of the publisher, the base URL, the dates. So this is being listed as being published from 1971 to current. So if we click open the plus button at the top, the next screen will show the archival status. So you can see on the left that there are 4 entries that are currently being preserved, and who that publisher is, and what keeper they're sending the information to, and the dates, and what date it was last updated. So you can see one, the third entry is in progress. So they are just in the works of depositing that content. On the right, the extent of the archive, the eye icon can be opened, and even more detail can be found. So this will give you the issues and volume level that there is preservation. I will note that there is no standard way of expressing volumes and issues. So the ISSN Center does not revise the way publishers enter this material to like normalize the data. Next, I'm going to move to a case study, and I wanted to use the Keepers Registry to analyze UC Davis's library collection, and my goal was to identify at-risk scholarship. So it ended up that I became a beta test for the Submit, Retrieve, Reuse service, and I learned a lot about ISSN numbers. But in the end, the number of duplicates taken out, the finding that there were some invalid ISSN numbers that were being introduced by our knowledge base for our electronic resource management system. We ended up at the end finding at a title level, only about 40% of the journals were in the Keepers Registry. So this has led to Submit, Retrieve, Reuse, finding how valuable the metadata can be in answering other questions that librarians might want to use in assessing their collections. So we've mentioned a few of the types of metadata, but the indexing services, whether a journal is in Crossref, PubMed, Scopus, Wikipedia, etc., that is in the paid for service, along with language, frequency of publication, and this is just a sampling of all of the different types of metadata you can retrieve. And Submit, Retrieve, Reuse allows you to submit a spreadsheet of, in my case, the 208,000 rather than to look them up individually. And this is my last slide. But for data utility for libraries, we've found that the data can be very helpful in cleaning and taking those invalid numbers and tracking down the correct number and enhancing discovery. It also can be a way to do a cross-analysis with your print and electronic resources. For the archival status, this can play into decisions involving serial storage and repurposing library space. You may want to assess the digital content of your holdings to see what would remain available for future users. Where I found 40% of Davis's that may be of interest specifically to your content creators on your campus. The other thing I'll mention is post-cancellation access is different than long-term access. So the archival status is really geared to future access, and it may not provide access if you cancel the subscription. And you may go back in an older webinar where we talk about that issue. So to develop the library strategic plan, this can also be useful to identify partners or memberships with archiving agencies that your library may want to support. You may be focused on the stability of open access journals, identify publishers, and in the licensing process, talk about whether they are maintaining those deposits. As we saw with the example with the New Zealand forestry, that there was a wide difference between its original publication in 1971 and it's currently 2025. So you might find out more information about where the other content is located. And then start conversations with publishers about long-term safeguarding. And that is my transition over to Alicia, who is going to give us some tips and tricks on talking to publishers about this complicated topic.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That really got us off to a brilliant start, and a really insightful perspective from library land. And now the segue is over to how librarians can use all of their skills and expertise to influence publishing practice when it comes to digital preservation. So perhaps the first question to ask is, why talk to publishers about digital preservation at all? Well, they're fun and they're nice people, so why not talk to them? But it's actually crucial to do so, and that's because digital preservation demands skills, technologies, and resources from librarians, and also from publishers and researcher authors as well, and joined up thinking across these communities. This is because all are stakeholders in the scholarly record and all have vital parts to play if digital information is to be created, disseminated, and curated to ensure its long-term accessibility and usability. Libraries and publishers have a mutual obligation to ensure long-term preservation of the scholarly record, leveraging library expertise in preservation, publisher expertise in content production and dissemination, and the author relationships and financial means of both communities. And NASIG has long exercised really terrific leadership in convening libraries and publishers to work together on digital preservation in particular. So let's talk a little bit about when to talk to publishers about digital preservation. If your library has a press, it's pretty easy. You can drop a message in Slack or whatever and go for coffee with your library publishing colleague. Other kinds of publishers are around too. They like coffee or tea if they're British. And so you can reach out. Really, this is a nice topic to engage with publishers of all kinds about. It's a topic that is really collaborative and that is constructively engaging both communities. But there's some formal opportunities and times when it's particularly important to bring up digital preservation in a more formal way. So anytime you are entering into an agreement between your library and a publisher, maybe that's an open access publishing agreement, maybe it's the charter for your library press, maybe you're entering a subscribe to open agreement with a publisher or a subscription agreement or read and publish, whatever it might be. Those formal agreements are particularly brilliant places to introduce formal language about and a mutual commitment to collaborating for long-term digital preservation. And the LibLicense website has some really helpful guides to language that can be included in those agreements. Other opportunities are when your library is talking to or doing agreements with organizations that aggregate or host content on behalf of a very wide array of publishers. So next time you talk to EBSCO or ProQuest, ask some questions about how they facilitate the long-term preservation for the book publishers who are being disseminated through their platforms. And there's also a really important potential role for library associations to play in talking to publisher associations to influence practice internationally. So, for example, ARL could reach out to the American Publishing Association, or IFLA with the International Publishers Association. So that association opportunity is really powerful for influencing policy and practice around the world. So how to talk to publishers about digital preservation? The first thing to really emphasize is that even though most publishers I engage with are interested in digital preservation, they're not first and foremost a memory organization the way a library or a museum, a gallery, or an archive is. So it's really important to think about how to approach them and how to attract their attention in a way that will really motivate them. And some of the ways that you can do this are by focusing on the fact that library customers and other customers really insist that long-term preservation is important. Also appealing to the fact that most academic authors want their contributions to knowledge to be part of that long-term record. That's a nice influencing opportunity and a good hook to hang conversations on. It's also in a publisher's best interest to make sure that the valuable content that they are entrusted with disseminating remains available even after a tsunami or an earthquake or a cybersecurity problem. So it's in their best interest too as organizations. And many publishers have mission statements that you might find connect really powerfully with the digital preservation agenda. For example, Learned Society publishers are there to advance their disciplines and often will have deep time records about how that discipline has evolved over time. They'll immediately get digital preservation if you connect it to their mission. Another difference is that publishers often preserve not directly, but through partners. And Michelle has already mentioned some of those partners, the Global CLOCKSS Network, PKP, PN, CLOCKSS, Portico, national libraries. They're all publishing partners in the digital preservation space. And so one thing that librarians can help publishers with is to help them find trusted archives. Now, Michelle's already mentioned certification, for example, under ISO 16363. Other ways to recognize a trusted digital preservation archive is through demonstrated mandate and funding, a track record of preserving academic content in particular, clear and transparent documented agreements, workflows, and processes that are openly available and discoverable, and the provision of information needed to populate the keeper's registry with that preservation status information. Also, a succession plan, so it's clear what will happen to the content entrusted to the archive if the archive ever closes or goes out of business itself. So here are a couple more case examples. Good practice is to preserve important content in at least 3 archives. And this is an example of SciFree, which is a Swedish hosting platform for scholarly content, scholarly journals. And here they have an agreement with the Swedish National Library, with Stockholm University, and they also work with us at CLOCKSS. I think a really important and powerful takeaway message is that digital content has less value to a library without this sort of good assurance that it is properly preserved and accessible for the long term. It would be risky to free up shelf space if you aren't really confident that a digital copy of that book or a proper surrogate is going to be available for the one in your collection. And so collaborative print collection building and collaborative digital collection building can both be informed by knowing what is preserved for the long term. Here's another example. This is a Diamond Open Access journal, the International Journal of the Commons. It's a fun read, actually. And again, this is preserved in 3 places, CLOCKSS in Global CLOCKSS Network and PKP-PN in this case. And how can you know that, besides this slide? you can, as Michelle has already emphasized, go to the Keeper's Registry and verify that claim for this journal yourself. So NASIG is an invaluable source of information to help guide your conversations with publishers. And I'm just going to wave this resource in particular in front of you, the talking points and questions to ask publishers about digital preservation. And this is for you if you like to go into conversations completely prepared. So it gives you hints and tips about how to check up on a publisher's preservation practices before you start drinking that coffee and grilling them about their practices and intentions. But it's got lots of other hints and tips as well. So for example, important questions that you can ask as a librarian that will help evolve a publisher's practice might include things like, are errata and corrected versions and retractions preserved for your publications? Do your deposits include supplementary materials like data sets and code and video, images, and so forth? Anyway, this NASIG guide, which is available on the NASIG website in the digital preservation area, is top-notch value for money. This is great. It's free, but it's really, really, really useful. So do check that out if you haven't already. This is a CLOCKSS resource that was developed by a working group of publishers and librarians, and this might be useful to you as well. Again, it's freely available. And let me just pull out a couple of things that I think it can add to the conversation. First off, because it's written by publishers for publishers, it has some detail about how all of the different parts of a publishing organization are impacted and involved in digital preservation. So if you want to think, oh, I'm meeting with an editor or somebody from a legal department or from the marketing team or somebody who's involved with metadata or journal production or copyright, there's specific information about digital preservation that connects to each of those types of roles within a publishing organization, which is really handy. Another thing that I find really helpful about this guide is that there are frequently asked questions. So a publisher might be worried, for example, about undermining their business models or whether they have the necessary copyright permissions from their own authors. And this guide gives you some really helpful information to engage them in discussions about that to, again, help influence and evolve their practice if that's needed. So you can also start from a less detailed perspective and a more philosophical perspective if you're engaging with a publisher. Think together about what users 100 years from now might need. Is it only the content, or is it the look and the feel? Is it the platform? Are there platform features that will need to be available to make the content usable and accessible in the future? You can have conversations about what version of a book to preserve, for example. Is a PDF the best thing, XML, like an EPUB file, or do we need both of those as part of a long-term scholarly record? How important is the presentation around the content? Does the content exist independently enough of the software through which it is delivered so that it can actually be separated out and preserved separately? And how can the publisher, for example, ensure that metadata is kept associated with its content in the long term as it flows into an archive and then out again into the hands of future users? And these are big questions. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, and it can be really powerful to think along together about the right strategy. So I'm really keen, if you are so motivated and you want to put some more in the chat, have you had any experiences trying to talk to publishers about digital preservation? What kinds of publishers? And what have your experiences been? So feel free to add. And with that, I think I'm going to stop chatting and hand over to Ella.
Okay. Thank you, Alicia. And everyone can hear me. Excellent. My microphone is working today. So let me share my screen here and hit slideshow. And of course, this was working 5 minutes ago and now it is not working. So here, let me see here. And it's not working. Or maybe it is. Okay, it's not. That was something else. Okay. Let's do that.
Ella, it says double click. There you go.
Okay.
That work? I think it did.
Vaguely. Is this working? Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm glad we got that working. So, hi everyone. My name is Ella Hitchcock. I'm the Scholarly Publishing Manager at the GSB Library, and I'm here today just to do a quick primer on the NASIG Model Digital Preservation Policy, and also run through a quick case study of how the model policy helped us at the GSB Library create our own policy. And gonna have to do this. Okay, cool. So, what does a preservation policy do? And can you tell we all use the same template for our slides? Um, so it documents commitments and decisions, helps you make deliberate, transparent choices about what you're preserving and how you're preserving it, and also makes the rationale behind preservation choices explicit. So all of this is to say that basically it allows you to make clear decisions and understand why you are making the decisions that you are making, and prepares you to have a sustainable vision for the future of whatever preservation activities you or your organization is participating in, whether that's working with third parties, working with publishers, or preserving everything in-house. So very quickly, let's go over how to use the NASIG model policy. I mean, there's no one way, there's no one correct right way to do it, but we'll quickly go through and take a look at the policy itself through screenshots. And if I can access the chat for a second, and this works, yes, I have added a link to the policy in chat. So if you want to take a look at that while I'm talking, feel free. So at its most basic level, the NASIG model policy really provides a framework for building a digital preservation policy at your institution or organization. So it includes a variety of sections, including like principles, scope, preservation activities, roles and responsibilities, collaboration, framework, review cycle, etc. And contained within each section is a kind of summary of what should be or might be included in the section, as well as some sample text and additional resources and sources for further research. And I would be remiss without referencing the pirate code in this case, which is that the NASIG model policy is a lot more like guidelines than actual rules. Obviously, there's not going to be one policy that fits for every single organization. There's no one size fits all policy here. But the NASIG model policy is a really good starting point to both kind of structure your thinking about how you want to develop a policy and also structure your conversations with both external and internal stakeholders about what a preservation policy and activities might look like for your organization. So moving on quickly to a case study. So we at the GSB used the NASIG Digital Preservation Model Policy to create our own digital policy for the preserve, as seen here, which is basically our institutional repository for our faculty publications, other faculty outputs like case studies and working papers, and also our archival collections as well. So here's some background. So first off, in 2021, this was a conversation happening a little bit earlier than 2021, more like 2020. But we basically identified a need for the library and the GSB as a whole to have a much more accurate and centralized preservation and storage space for faculty publications mainly, but for kind of other digital content, including archival stuff, born digital records, and kind of a catch-all term, which will become important later because scoping is important. So we made that decision and then contracted with Libnova, which is a digital preservation company that provides software for both dark archive digital preservation and an access platform, which, if this works, nope, that's not right at all, which is the access platform is what we're seeing here. So 2021, we contract with them. 2022, we're learning the platform and figuring out how we want to use it, how it can kind of or incorporate into whatever we're already doing, which wasn't much. And then figuring out what the platform is going to look like and how we're going to organize it. And then in late 2022, I have a light bulb moment where I realize we don't actually have any policy. Like, we don't have any central policy about how we're going to manage all of this stuff, all of this born digital and digitized stuff that we have. So, I mean, we have meeting notes and we have drafts and we have all of these documents that are separated across 3 different Google Drives. So we decide that we are going to create a digital preservation policy that is going to manage all of that. So 2023, the year, is all policy development, which is environmental scanning, internal assessment, writing, sending it to leadership, getting it back with revisions, so many revisions, and then more writing. And we eventually did get it approved, yes, but it did take a while, and it was definitely a process. So the first step was environmental scanning, which was pretty much snooping on everyone else's stuff. Like, what is everyone else doing? So we looked at other academic institutions, other universities, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, the UC system, kind of trying to get a sense of what other academic institutions were doing. And then also looked at guidelines and standards. So specifically looking at the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, the NDSA, who has a lot of really great resources for like specific file formats and like the levels of digital preservation. So it really helped us scope what we wanted to do. And then, of course, we looked at the Library of Congress and their digital preservation resources. And once we had decided that, once we'd gotten really specific, we looked at the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, the FADG, which provides a kind of list of file formats and preservation formats that are kind of good for long-term sustainable preservation, which is, that's a weird way to say that. Anyway, and then lastly, we looked at existing policy examples. So NASIG was the one that I found and latched onto because it was an incredibly clear framework and kind of provided a step-by-step document that allowed me to really figure out what I wanted to do. Whoops. So once we had kind of looked at that and taken a look at what everyone else was doing, we had to look inwards and really figure out what we wanted to do. And that entailed asking a lot of questions of a lot of different people. So we had to figure out the audience for the policy, what we wanted the scope to be, because we had a lot of different formats, a lot of different material types. So we had to figure out what we were committed to preserving and especially what we were not committed to preserving. And then also what preservation activities we wanted to do. If we wanted to get really granular and do integrity checking on every file, or if we wanted to kind of upload it into a lot of different places to make sure that we had a lot of copies, or all of that. And then also figuring out how much preservation work is feasible, because we have a pretty small staff. It's like me and a couple other people. And preservation is kind of a lot of work. There's a lot of steps that goes into it, and it's a complicated beast and it's always changing. So we really had to figure out what was feasible and what was doable for us. And then figuring out how we wanted to sustain the policy. So what that meant for us was figuring out what we needed now and what we had right now and who we could work with, like Stanford Libraries, for example. And then figuring out what we would need in the long term, whether we would be able to continue at the level of preservation we are currently at, or if we would have to kind of scale back our preservation activities at a later date. And luckily, looks like we won't have to do that for a little while, at least, knock on wood. And so once we'd done all that and like figured out what everyone else was doing and figure out what we wanted to do, then it was time to actually write the damn thing, which was, for me, using the NASIG model policy. So we kind of already looked at the, I don't know, table of contents for the model policy, and we saw all of the different sections. And I basically used that model policy and did kind of a one-to-one writing. So we changed a couple things, but most of the sections are the same. Or at least I should say most of the titles of the sections are the same. There are obviously going to be some places where the section, like for example, the scope in the model policy is necessarily pretty general because we don't want to get super specific in a model policy. So what we ended up doing was using some basic text from the scope section and then really drilling down and getting very specific into what exactly we wanted to preserve. So in our policy in the scope section, we have like 4 different subsections that include like faculty publications, faculty speaker events, archival material, born digital content and digital content, and really kind of get specific in what we wanted to do. And that's pretty much it. So I hope this has been educational. I don't know, this is awkward, but before we go into questions, we do have a brand new survey that we've created to really get feedback from you guys, from our community, about what your digital preservation needs are. Do you have any questions or if you have any concerns? And so that's kind of the best way for us to learn about new and emerging issues and really tailor our resources and webinars to what you guys are interested in. So we will put the link to the survey in the chat, and if you guys could fill that out, that would be fantastic. And if you have any further questions or if questions come up after the webinar is over, please feel free to contact us at the emails here. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for being here. And let's open up the floor to questions. Okay.
Thanks, Ella.
Yeah, thank you.
Um,
And I will move to the next slide, which is the final slide.
I do have one question here that James has posted. We have some good content above. A couple people talked about their interest in this space. And James talked about ensuring that research remains available for future scholarship And Mickey noted that I'm interested in learning about strategies employed to tackle changing, evolving technology and tools when it comes to maintaining access to digital works. So those were good comments. And then we have another question down here from James. He's like, you covered a lot of helpful resources, but do you have any top tips for people starting out to get to grips with digital preservation concepts and terminology?
Oof. Okay. Well, I guess I'll start with that, and Michelle and Alicia can chime in. I think like Library of Congress, digital preservation, they have kind of a whole set of web pages that are, at least for me, were super helpful figuring out what digital preservation was and what digital preservation wasn't. Um, and kind of once I had a sense of that, it was a lot easier for me to kind of understand what a lot of other people were doing. But it is a pretty wide field. So, Michelle, Alicia, have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would highly recommend the Digital Preservation
Mm.
Coalition website, which has a digital preservation handbook, really clearly written, a really easy and brilliant starting place for anybody who might feel overwhelmed.
All right, cool. Thank you for posting that resources in the chat for everyone. Um, let's see. And let's see. I think you guys maybe have a talking points pamphlet. Does anybody want to mention that?
Get over here to unmute. Yes, I definitely want to highlight, and I can share, let's see. Oops.
Should I stop sharing, Michelle, so you can
Actually, will
share
this
the group?
do it?
Yeah, you can.
Steal it?
Yes.
Can you see that now?
There it is. Yep.
Alrighty.
Uh-huh.
So we have a very talented member who's going to be our vice chair for the Digital Preservation Committee. And she has developed this pamphlet that really encapsulates what we've tried to go over today, and kind of a succinct what are the activities, policy, services. So that is freely available as well, and we'll drop that in chat.
Perfect. Thank you. That looks like a terrific resource. Yeah. So thanks, Alicia, for the credit. And again, you've got the digital preservation survey link. And not seeing any other questions, I want to thank our speakers today. So thanks for an extremely informative session. Thanks to everyone who was able to attend. I'd also like to do another call out for the evaluation survey. So that is going to follow in an email, and it'll include slides from this presentation. And also send out another reminder that please remember to register for next month's presentation on authority control. And that's all the housekeeping details I have for you. And thanks everyone for attending.